Cover to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. We have a real treat for you today. Award-winning novelist Alan Jacobson, one of the very best working in the suspense, thriller, action novel genre, and fans will be delighted to know he is at the top of his game with his latest, Die Trying. His story of how he came to be a bestseller, a bit of a twist to it. He does have a degree in English from Queens College, but he went to the prestigious Palmer College of Chiropractic in California, became a highly successful chiropractor with an excellent reputation, and so much so he was appointed qualified medical evaluator by the state of California and ended up doing extensive experience testifying as an expert witness. Then, out of the blue, he injured his wrist in a freak accident, unable to continue practicing. So he went to Plan B, fired up his computer, and became a writer. Now, a great deal of his skill comes from the depth of his research and connections with law enforcement, including the Marshal Service, SWAT, Drug Enforcement Administrations, even Scotland Yard. And all of that results in novels that have a degree of realism that fans devour. Now, I will say this, no spoiler, but there will be some interesting technology surprises in Die Trying, including one will have most people saying, just like Will Smith in Independence Day, I have got to get me one of these. Alan is also, and I can testify from personal experience, an excellent interview and a good friend of this microphone. This is interview number 5 with him, Reaching Back to Darkness of Evil in 2017. And for those of you keeping score at home, this is author interview number 875. And as a personal favor, Alan allowed me to schedule a session on my 76th birthday today. We're very pleased to welcome back Alan Jacobson.
Happy birthday, Roger.
Thank you so much. I was fishing for that and I got it. Before we do dive into Die Trying, I want to take a few questions, explore a bit about your backstory, as it were, because just like writing a series character, you develop a bit more every time you introduce them. I want to delve into some of this cool stuff because one reviewer talked about you as approaching each project with a mindset of an investigative newspaper journalist, and you did have some newspaper experience in college. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually in chiropractic school. I forgot all about that, Roger. Yes, we had a school paper that was okay. Uh, it did its job, but the English major in me thought it could be a lot better. And the creative juices even then were flowing, even though I was in a science-based program, and I guess it didn't have an outlet. So this became the outlet for me. And when I was thinking about it, the professor who was teaching the X-ray and radiology courses said to me, I think you should do this, because I knew him pretty well. He was from New York, so we had a kinship, even though we were in California, Northern California. And he said, I think you should be the editor of the paper. And I thought, I don't even have time to write poetry, which I thought, oh, I don't have time to write stories or novels, but in chiropractic school, I should be able to write poetry. I didn't have a spare moment to even do that.
Yeah.
So when he said this, it was like, are you kidding? Are you crazy? But with his support and backing, I thought, well, I could do this better, and I could make this something that I think could be special. So yeah, I revamped the newspaper. A friend of mine in chiropractic school, my study partner, came along for the ride, and we expanded that paper from 8 pages to 16 pages, and we had columns on the realities of practice, which my uncle actually wrote. My
Nice.
uncle, who was a namesake in a number of the Opposite Team Black and even the Karen Vail novels, Dr. Leonard Rudnick.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, yeah. And so he wrote a column on the realities of practice, which was really uh, so much more than I thought it could be when he first pitched the idea. It was terrific.
Mhm.
We had an X-ray learning column because I was also doing the X-ray Learning Resource Center. I was building one for the college. And anyway, so it was just a terrific experience working with everybody. I learned a lot more than I would have not doing that.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's my I totally forgot about that. I still
Well,
somewhere, I think, have some copies of that paper.
Wow, that's amazing. Those of us in journalism like to think of you as one of our boys who made it. You know, Now, I've got two more of your early free author questions to nail you down to today. In one of our earlier interviews, you mentioned that as a young man, you had written a screenplay for the MASH television series and actually got an agent to try and market it. Do you still have that script?
Yeah, I do. I actually wrote seven of them.
Oh my.
Uh, there were, I think, three that I thought were really that could have been produced. Uh, One in particular was my favorite, and that was the one that actually made it to Alan Alda uh, through back channels. It didn't even come from my agent. My
Yeah.
agent was William Morris. At the time, they were a New York only
Uh,
uh, agency. They later expanded and became big in Hollywood as well. But so it did make it to Alan Alda, and I do have a signed letter from Alan Alda basically saying that it wasn't uh, submitted by a literary agent, and therefore he couldn't open it or read it, which I have doubts about, but let's just say that's what he wrote and signed it. It's on MASH letterhead.
well, that's
My
kind of
friend has
nifty.
the original. I
All right.
have a copy.
All right. Okay, one more from the background. In your time as an expert witness, was there a particular trial or something unusual when you look back over that portion of your career that sticks out in your mind where
Oh,
either something weird happened or, yeah,
yes, yes. And I used some of this in False Accusations, which, as you may recall, is my debut novel
right,
back in
right.
the late 90s. And that experience of testifying was uh, it taught me a lot about the justice system, and I use justice in quotes because it's not always just.
No.
But so what had happened was we had an attorney who was trying to get me to say something, and it was not correct, but he
Mhm.
wanted to, let's just say, manipulate me into answering the question the way he wanted it answered.
Yeah,
And I saw what he was doing. I knew what he wanted, and it just was not true. So I wasn't going to say it. So he wanted a yes or no question. Dr. Jacobson is yes or no. Well, I can't give you a yes or no answer because it's not yes and it's not no. And he said, that's not the question. Is it yes or no? Is this true or not? And I said, I can't answer the question. I turned to the judge and I said, I cannot give him a yes or no question. And the judge looked at me and he said, you will provide a yes or no question or I will hold you in contempt. And I said, but you're forcing me to give an answer that's not true. And I don't want to mislead the jury. And he said, you're going to give a yes or no question, or you will be in contempt. So, what that taught me was that as fair as a system as we have, and I think we have a pretty darn good system compared to other countries, doesn't always work the way we want it to and the way the founders perhaps meant it to.
yeah.
So, it taught me a
Interesting.
lot about life as well.
As somebody once
Yeah.
pointed out, he says it doesn't matter if the judge is fair if the argument is between Muhammad Ali and your grandma. In other words, if they got big legal guns and you don't, they're going to win, even though the judging is
Yeah.
fair. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, there's that too. I mean, you've got a lot of things. You've got the juror pool,
Mhm.
the state or city in which it's being held, because the jury pool is pulled from,
Mhm.
a jury of your peers, so people in your community. And if you have a community that's biased or,
Yeah.
can be chosen and you end up with a biased jury, I mean, that's going to poison your trial.
Yeah.
And one need look no further than the O.J. Simpson case
Oh,
and the
yes.
fiasco that was. And, I had a not direct involvement, but a deep involvement because I was writing false accusations at the time. And because of the time that I spent in the blood spatter pattern analysis class, which was held at the Department of Justice, I had access to textbooks on forensics of all gunshot wounds and blood
Wow.
spatter and DNA and all that, and DNA at that time in 94, I think it was, in its very, very early stages. And so I had a lot of textbooks. And when the defense attorney came up and he brought a book up for uh, Dennis Fung, if I remember correctly, who was the forensic scientist who was in charge of the DNA and collected the DNA or handled the DNA in some respect. And he was questioned by the defense attorney. He gave him the book and he read the title of the book into the record and I went, I have that book, and I ran into my office and I grabbed it off the shelf and I opened up to the page and the paragraph that was referenced. And I'm following along as Dennis Fung read the highlighted paragraph that the defense attorney wanted him to read. And it dealt with the fact that DNA can be degraded by dust and sunlight and dirt and so on and so forth. And therefore, because the DNA, OJ's DNA, was not properly handled according to the textbook, it showed that it was, or the DNA from the crime scene, it showed that it was OJ's DNA, and that was all because of contamination, because it was not handled properly. However, the next paragraph in that book, which was not highlighted, therefore Dennis Fung was not asked to read it. Next paragraph was, however, DNA cannot morph into another person's DNA because of contamination, which was
Ah,
pivotal to the entire case
wow.
because the defense attorney's point was, oh, it was contaminated dust, sun, so on and so forth. Therefore, that's why it showed DNA that matched O.J. Simpson, and you can't rely on that evidence. And
Uh,
that's just the next paragraph showed that's absolutely not true. It cannot morph into OJ's DNA. It showed OJ's DNA, even if it was contaminated, but it was OJ's DNA.
wow.
And so I'm yelling at the TV screen, and yeah, well,
Did you end up like calling the prosecutor's office and said, look at the next paragraph? No. Of course they wouldn't
no,
because
but
they wouldn't know that. Yeah.
the funny the funny coda to that was uh, many years later, I was at a mystery writers conference. I believe it was BoucherCon, but I think it was
Mhm.
BoucherCon. And the prosecutor was there, and she
Oh,
had written a mystery novel or two. And I was coming down the escalator and I saw her there, and I thought, do I go up to her and tell her the story? Do I just let it go? Because it really bothered me. I was
yeah.
angered by that they missed I mean, they blew their entire case, which was a huge case in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, I decided not to do that, Roger. I took the high road and turned and walked away the other
For you.
direction. But man,
Right.
I was
And
tempted.
when she watches this and goes, why didn't he tell me? No, that would be something else. Wow. Well, as a way of transitioning from talking about previous to what's going on now, we're going to ask you to read a little bit of your work because it's always fascinating to hear it in the author's own voice.
So the passage I'm going to read, it's a little over a page. Um, Vail is Karen Vail, FBI profiler Karen Vail, who does part-time work with the Operations Support Intelligence Group, also known as OPSIG. Uh, she is going through periodic training because she was trained not only as an FBI agent, but as a profiler, investigator. And she's been working with this covert ops group for several years now. And when they need her, they pull her into the case and the mission. And she's been undergoing this training on a quarterly basis to kind of bring her up to snuff so that she can carry herself as an operator when needed. And so this scene takes place in the Combat Readiness Training Center in Gulfport, Mississippi, which is a real place. And so Vale is all geared up in helmet and tactical gear, and she's entering a building. It's a set of buildings that they have on the complex in this beautifully wooded area in Mississippi. And so that's where we join this. As Vale maybe we'll try that again. Um, and I am reading from the advanced reader copy of Die Trying by yours truly.
Mhm.
As Vale crept up to a door on the second floor of apartments, she was prepared for anything. She had been through such training before in Hogan's Alley at the FBI Academy, so on the surface, this drill was not foreign to her. But it increased her heart rate, dilated her pupils, and heightened her senses. A perfect exercise designed to reproduce what an operator could experience in the field. Rodman blasted open the door, and Vale led the way inside. As she started down a hallway, she saw a flash of movement to her left. She turned and came face to face with a large man clad in black tactical clothing, wearing a balaclava. Ah, the close quarters in close quarters combat. And oh, yeah, the combat. He had several inches and at least 75 pounds on her, and the look on his face said that he intended to use every unit of measurement to his advantage as he stepped toward her. But Vale was accustomed to men throwing their weight around. My ex-husband learned the hard way. That doesn't work with me. She shifted her M4 rifle and swung the barrel into the man's face, momentarily stunning him and standing him upright. And that left his balls exposed, which brought to mind the first lesson Vale had learned. Never let a set of unprotected testicles go unkicked in hand-to-hand combat. Vale unleashed a powerful kick with her tactical boot, dropping the guy to his knees, her Glock 19 swiftly drawn and pushed against his forehead. Karen, DeSantos said in her ear comms. Karen, he's down. Take a breath. She took that breath and straightened up, secured her pistol, and repositioned the rifle. Copy that. You good? DeSantos asked as Rodman pushed past Vale to tend to her victim. She faced DeSantos, her breath still rapid and shallow. I'd say that qualified as short duration, high intensity conflict with sudden violence at close range, yeah? Yeah, DeSantos said, wide eyed and nodding animatedly. Why don't you take five? Get some air. No, I'm good, Hector. Take five, Karen. Even through the two sets of goggles between them, she saw the intensity in his gaze. Vale turned and pushed past Zhang and another couple of geared up operators, then ran down the metal staircase, pulling off her tight helmet as she went. Guess I do need some air. As she reached the bottom, she looked out at the stand of trees 50 yards away, her kinky red hair blowing in the gentle breeze. She felt DeSantos beside her. What? She asked. Feel better? A little. That air thing, that was a good idea. Uh-huh. He turned to face her. She could not ignore her friend, so she met his gaze. So what was that back there? Picturing Deacon in front of you? Vale narrowed her eyes. Damn, was it that obvious? He shrugged. It got a little intense, you know? This is an exercise, and you beat that dude up pretty good. Probably broke his nose, burst a testicle or two. Vale looked back at the building. Seriously? A guy wouldn't joke about that. Well, shit, I didn't realize. She looked back at him. Really? Really? Maybe I should go Let it go. For now. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Should I be concerned? Vale rubbed her forehead with a black tactical glove. I'm good. I'm fine. I've been fine. But I do think you're right. Still, she shook her head. It's been years since Deacon. Hey, the trauma never really goes away. Like PTSD, it can linger. She nodded. Like PTSD. Deacon's abuse probably did cause PTSD. She never looked at it that way, but shame on her. She should have. Probably hasn't been an issue because Robbie couldn't be a better partner. I thought I'd put Deacon and that part of my life behind me. Hey, you're the one who studies the mind, not me. But do we ever really leave the past in our past? Well, shit. Too early in the morning for something that profound. He gave her a tap on the shoulder. That was rhetorical, Karen. Get your head straight, get your shit together, and get that helmet back on. We're just getting started. Southern strikes next. Lots more exercise planned for the weekend. Awesome. Vale took another breath and seated her helmet and turned to face the building. Can't wait.
Beautiful. And that is one of the reasons that people really like your writing. You have a gift for dialogue that feels real. It's not, hi, I'm writing something very clever here. No, it's the way people talk. And how did you develop that ear?
So, in undergraduate college at Queens College, I took a course, writing course. I was English major, so I took a lot of writing courses, and this one in particular was terrific. It was a screenwriting, playwriting workshop, and it was taught by a playwright. I think he had uh, some plays produced off Broadway, and he was really good, obviously.
Mhm.
And when you're dealing with plays, it's all, well, not all, but a lot of it is dialogue.
Right.
And there was an exercise, we were broken into groups, and there was an exercise that we had to do. And it was um, write your own play and then perform it. And so the writing of the play forced us to practice it. And so what that did was it helped us develop our ear for dialogue.
Ah,
And then when you're performing it, you're looking at what you wrote and you realize, well, that doesn't work. But if I say it this way, that does work. So you instantly realize what works, what doesn't work, because speaking dialogue is very different from, reading it, and hearing it because you're speaking it is different as well. So that's why a lot of writers, when we write, we will often read passages aloud
mhm.
so that we can hear our dialogue and make sure that it is true to form and what we intended, and that it conveys what we want it to convey. So that's a big part of dialogue. I read 30 years ago a book on dialogue, and its point was that um, if you were to take a tape recorder and put it down and have two people speak, and you recorded that dialogue and then transcribed it, you could say, well, this is good dialogue. It's real dialogue. I just transcribed what we had discussed. But an author who knows dialogue and who's a professional writer would know that dialogue would suck because it's filled with and and like and throwaway lines like how you doing today? Oh, I'm doing great. None of that
Yeah.
should belong in your finished novel because it doesn't advance the story, doesn't advance the character, doesn't tell you anything about the scene. It's throwaway dialogue and it should be thrown away. So the key in dialogue is that it has to mean something to either the character or the scene or something that's unfolding in the action. And I mean, there's a lot more to it than just that, but at the bare bones, there's got to be a reason for it to be on the page, and it has to show us something about what's happening and the characters who are speaking that dialogue.
What's interesting to me is the character voices in that one scene alone are so different, you can immediately tell who is saying what. And that's part of developing their character in the back. How big a backstory in your head do you have of all these characters?
So that's a great question. I remember when I was starting off, now 31 years ago, as a writer, writing my first novel. I was reading, even though I have a degree in English, I wanted to, first of all, refresh my memory because it had been a number of years since I had been in undergraduate and had written creatively. So, and I didn't know anything about the publishing industry. You don't learn that as an English major.
Yeah.
So I was reading I bought a ton of books at Barnes and Noble and Borders, and I was just, reading everything I could about the business, how it worked, about constructing novels, what editors were looking for, what readers were looking for. And one of the books talked about characterization. And literally, Roger, there was a questionnaire, a multi-page questionnaire that said, fill this out for your characters, for every character that you're going to be putting in your novel. And what type of food does your character like? What's his favorite color? What does she enjoy doing? And I'm going like, uh, really? So I started. I don't know. I answered maybe 5 questions and I stopped and I went, how is this going to help me? It's not at all. You need to know your character, yes, but favorite color, what type of food is, vegetable he likes? No, that is completely irrelevant. You need to know your character on a core level. Is the character impulsive? I mean, things that matter to the scene that you're constructing and the story that you're trying to tell, and how those characters interact with one another in that scene. And who they are as people is so much more valuable to me as a writer. Um, are they uh, passionate about something? Does it color everything in their world? Do they see things through a certain lens? Um, so, over the years, another OBSEC novel, The Lost Codex, there was a religious figure that in one of the chapters. And that made sense because I was writing about an ancient manuscript. Actually, it was an ancient manuscript in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and religion played a role. And they were meeting with a religious leader. And so I had to think like that religious leader who happened to be a rabbi in this scene, and I needed to talk to a rabbi to understand what his or her, in this case it was a him, his perspective on this topic and how he viewed it. And when you're dealing with somebody who does something professionally, whether it be a physician or a veterinarian or a rocket scientist, which, as you know, I did in one of my other novels, they see the world through certain types of lenses and they think different ways. The rocket scientist will think mathematically in a lot of ways and see things through that lens. And that was one of the things that the rabbi had related to me, is that we got on this topic of truth and facts. And his point was, are there truths? Are there facts? And I went, well, of course there are. First of all, I'm a person of science. Yes, I'm a person of content creation and creativity. That is goes to the core of who I am. But I also grew up with science, the chiropractic part, and to this day, I am very scientifically inclined. I love reading about science and technology, and it always makes it into my novels, right? Um, so I had to understand where he was coming from, and I can't say at the end of the day I completely agreed with him, but I understood his point. We
Mhm.
all view things through our own lenses, and our lenses are shaped by our experiences, our life experiences, the things that we have found to be true to us. So, when you're talking about truth and facts, it's always viewed through that lens that we view them through. Now, we can get into the nuances of, well, if you're testing out a fact in science and you measure something, that's a fact. It measures, 3.3 kilograms. That's a fact. That's, that can't change, right? So that's the part that I didn't completely agree with, but I understood. And actually, even though that was now several years ago, it has helped me understand what's going on in our country nowadays relative to politics because um, you have such polarization in our country that um, I've that discussion I had with him, the rabbi, helped me understand that people are seeing things through their lenses. And when when we look at that and we judge someone, well, how could they believe that? Clearly, that's not true. To them, they are viewing it through their lens, through their experience. And then you can get into other nuances like echo chambers
Mhm.
and algorithms of showing us things, or us having our own algorithm of watching things that we
Right.
want to watch because it reinforces our beliefs through that lens that we have been viewing
Yeah.
things our
Yeah.
entire lives. So it was a very interesting conversation. It helped me understand how people can think things. It helped me understand interactions between characters and their convictions. And sometimes bad people are not meaning to be bad. They just view things because they've been uh, taught that things are a certain way, or they've been, I hate to use this word, but it's, for lack of a better term, it really is a form of brainwashing.
Yeah.
When you keep seeing something and you're in an echo chamber that reinforces it, and you're talking to people with like-minded rationale and belief structures, that becomes your world, and it just reinforces itself, and you're in this endless cycle. And it could be religious zealots, it could be jihadists, terrorists, and fanaticism, and I mean, there's so much that this can get into. And I'm not a sociologist, and that's not my training. I haven't had any training in it. It's just, again, my observations and discussions with people, because as you noted, I talk to a lot of people across a range of subjects and disciplines, and it's really opened my eyes to life and how people view things, and how we should view people who view things differently than we do.
That's beautifully said. Absolutely. And this is really relevant to die trying because we want to be careful about not giving away key plot points, but we will say it does include Karen Vail and the OPSIG team Black Covert Ops, and it gives you an ability to move back and forth as often as the case. Often structurally, you want to go between 2 points of action back and forth. Just get this one going good and then switch. Keep the reader on his foot. But you have Black Ops overseas, a frighteningly real sounding conspiracy at home. And at one point, you actually have three separate actions going toward the end of the book. So I'm thinking, juggling all this, are you plotting out ahead of time? Are you plotting minimally, or are you just pantsing it the whole way?
I do not pants.
Yeah.
um I never have. And so, it's a spectrum. And it also took me years to understand that too, because early on in my writing career, I believed that the correct way to write a novel was outlining.
Mhm.
And if you didn't outline, you didn't know what you were doing. That was wrong. And I'm fir first one to admit it. That's the way I do it. That's the way my brain works. Um, that's not the way Lee Child does it. And he told me such. And uh, I came and I would say I came to realize I don't even know. It all kind of blends together. 25 years ago, maybe, I realized that we all think differently, we all create differently. And for some people who, fly by the seat of their pants, that works for them. it would not work for me. And some of it is the type of writing that I do. Um, I try to make sure that, there are things that happen in the beginning that have relevance to the things in the middle and super relevant to the things at the end. And when you look back or read it a second time, and some of my readers have read my books 8 times, and that's
Mhm.
not an exaggeration, it's got to stand up to that kind of scrutiny.
Yeah.
I don't write my novels with the intention that somebody's going to read it 8 times and go back and say, well, yeah, I mean, it all fits together.
Yeah.
But, when I'm outlining my books, it's kind of the way my mind thinks, and that is my process. I used to say, I guess I still say it, that my outline is my map, and I am going on a journey. I get in my car and I start driving, and I know I'm going to get on, the freeway. You could tell I spent a lot of time in California, the
Yes.
freeway. Um, get on the freeway, start driving. Uh, Now, my outline is such that if I see something interesting as I'm passing, I'll say, wait a minute, signal, get off,
Yeah.
check that out, because that's really interesting. I want to learn about that. I want to explore that, right? And then I do that, and then I get back on the freeway and I'm headed toward, my destination again. So for me, that's an abstract way of saying that my outline is kind of blow by blow. It's not a chapter outline, which Jim Patterson does. I don't do that. Um, Things are not plotted that uh, strictly. I allow myself the opportunity to explore, and also while I'm researching, because I do, a few months of research before I start writing so that I, again, know where I'm
Mhm.
starting, where it's going, and where I'm going to end up at the end. But I also want to make sure I get it right,
Yeah.
so that people who actually do this stuff, whether it be flying to the moon or, pulling out an M4 rifle, that I know what I'm talking about, and they know that I know what I'm talking about. So, I may learn something during my research that I will be doing while I'm writing, because sometimes you can't think of everything at the
Yeah.
beginning, right? And you're writing and you go, oh, well, I didn't think of that before. Let me, so
Yeah.
I'll drop an email to one of my contacts that I had spoken to about this and go, but what happens if this, or, how does this work? And they'll reply. And if they say something that was like, whoa, that's unexpected. And if it suddenly pops into my head, oh, wait, that would be really cool if blah, blah, blah. And then I could, change it, work this in. And, so that's going to change my outline a little bit. But at the end of the day, I'm, I know my ending,
Yeah.
because that ending is big.
Yeah.
Uh, the last, it varies, but say 50, 60, 70, 80 pages is the climax.
Yeah.
And that ramp up. So, one thing that some authors have difficulty with is that middle kind of, it's almost like a low glycemic uh, time of the day where you've eaten lunch and now your blood sugar is getting low and you're in the middle of the book. It's getting boring. I usually don't have that problem because the middle is kind of the slow ramp up to where I'm headed, and that's
Yeah.
the climax.
Yeah.
And that ramp up just runs right into the last, whatever, 75, 80 pages of the novel where, as you noted, there could be multiple things happening, and I'm going back and forth between all those things. And that ending is the ending that I've been building towards since page one. I mean, that inciting incident at the very beginning of the novel is what is going to be solved or uh, featured on the last page of the novel.
Yeah.
So that's why, to me, an outline is, for me, the best way to go, because everything is heading toward that last. page, so to speak.
I think that as your analogy of the freeway, you have left yourself room to stop off at an occasional interesting roadside attraction and pick that up and include it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. To me, that freedom to create is really important so that you don't have this um, outline that takes over you. You have to control your outline because
Uh,
you could, I could get to something and go, what? Yeah, I don't want to go there. I would rather go here.
yeah.
And as long as I can end up where I wanted to,
Yeah.
and just a really quick example of that, when I was writing Velocity, I was working with and actually I wasn't even working with him. I uh I had finished the novel and I had asked one of my experts, who's since become a very, very close friend of mine, uh, if he knew somebody in the field who could read it and if he liked it, provide an endorsement quote. Because I always like to do that. Somebody
Hmm.
who does what I'm writing about, to read it, and if they like it, I think that
Yeah.
lends the credibility, the research credibility, right? So he had a friend, close friend, who was just retired from the DEA in OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. He spent his last 3 or 5 years of his career in that office, and that's like the police of the police, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? So they make sure that agents are doing their jobs properly according to the law and not breaking the law and not breaking regs and rules and procedures and so on and so forth. And so I gave him the manuscript, and I don't know if he's going to like it or not like it, write a blurb, not write a blurb. I just know no idea because I hadn't had any contact with him other than, Paul said, you'd be willing to read this. Hope you enjoy it. Here it is,
Hmm.
and email. Um, so I get an email from him. I need to discuss something with you. Here's my phone number. So I call him, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm really not happy with this chapter." And he tells me what chapter it was, and I went, "Oh, well, tell me." He goes, "Well, I don't know if I should bother because you probably don't want to change it, or you probably don't want to do, you don't want to care what I said, no, I totally do. Um, I I want to know what's bothering you and why. And if I can fix it, if it makes sense, I will do it. If it's not, we'll discuss it." So he tells me what it was, and it dealt with something where there's a group of agents, I think a couple FBI, a DEA, one or two DEA, I think there was an ATF agent, and he says to me, this is against the law, it's illegal, and it rubs me the wrong way, and it really, really angers me. And I went, okay, all right, let's discuss this. So he told me why, and I went, okay, I can understand that. And he said, well, let me tell you how. So I said to him, how would you handle this? He goes, well, let me tell you how we used to do it back in the day, old school. And I went, okay. And he tells me, and I went, you know what? I like that better than what I wrote.
Yeah.
So I said, give me a few days. I'm going to rework this chapter. And I rewrote it and I sent it to him and I said, what do you think of this? And he goes, I love it. And so this wasn't even somebody that I had been working with as, an expert, but his input was invaluable and it made the manuscript better. So
Hey.
I was very happy to
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
gotten that input, and I'm glad that he didn't just go past it and go, yeah, whatever, okay, and
Yeah.
finish reading and not say anything.
That's an honest reader. It's one of your best friends. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on today is how I want to call it the journalist side because I'm a journalist and I want to compliment our field uh, for the telling detail. And I just want to read like two sentences that you lay out this one. And you say, Lucas DeSantos was more than a retired four-star general. He was a media celebrity, a highly decorated veteran, and a hugely successful entrepreneur. only no longer commanded troops, he still commanded a room. Character sketch, 2 sentences, you knocked that one out of the park. How does that feel?
Uh, so the funny thing is, Roger, when I lived in California and I moved cross country about 3 years ago, I used to have workout machines in my garage, and I would work out, and I kept copies of my books stored in the garage, and because in California you could do that, the
Yeah,
climate
yeah,
was good for that. And I would sometimes have a copy of my book sitting there, and I would just pick it up and I'd open it and just start reading. And a lot of time, almost invariably, it was hard for me to stop because I was really enjoying, and it could have been a book from 10 years
hmm,
prior. So I didn't necessarily remember the scene until I got into it. And, I'm just sitting there and I'm laughing. If it was funny, or just, going, man, that was a good scene, or I may even reflect on the research and the people that I did it with. And it makes me feel good. It makes me feel proud of my novels. And I am. I'm very proud of each and every one of them. And, that's important as you look back on your career, 15, 16 novels now. And I just really enjoy reading those things. And that, what you just read, that would be one of those where I would just smile to myself and go, yeah, that was good.
yeah,
Um, Now, some of that comes from working with these people that do the type of thing that I'm writing about.
yeah,
And uh, I have been fortunate to know and work with on a research basis high up people in the military, generals, and uh, getting to know a few of them pretty well. And there's a reason why, some of them came up in rank. Character is a big part of it, and leadership qualities.
yeah,
And that is so true. I mean,
yeah,
when they're there and they start speaking, they do kind of command, people are listening, and they may not even be real. The general may not realize he is doing this, and the person who's listening may not realize it's happening, but that's what's happening. People are listening, and
yeah.
you become really interested in what they're saying and their perspective on things.
Let me pass another compliment to you. And this is kind of interesting. It's not usually happen. Once in a while, you come across an author, and I have several, where you're reading along and you say, I wonder about, and then you turn the page and it's answered right there. And I wanted the example that I was thinking, you talk about the guy with one eyebrow and the other blue, and you mentioned, you even referenced Max Scherzer from who used to pitch for the Nats and the Dodgers. And so I'm thinking, God, what was that called? I've seen that before. And I turn the page and you got Rusakov saying it's called heterochromia iridium, and it has to do with pigment. And I'm going, okay, you're tracking my mind as I'm reading this. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Again, and I always learn something from your books, not only about that, but one of the things I'm always up for a new what's the word I'm looking for, acronym for that. And I already knew about the JTTF but the 511 Tactical, I didn't know that was a brand with some really awesome stuff. Now you've got me interested in that.
Yeah,
But there was one, gosh, I just moved it this morning while I was putting this together. But it was a four-letter acronym having to do with, basically was describing a Faraday cage environment where they couldn't get any signals out from that.
right.
I'll find it here in a moment, probably, or probably there. SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility.
Right.
It's tough to work in a conversation, but we can get it sometimes. So thanks.
Just before you ask that question,
Yeah.
my first time in a skiff was I was at an Air Force base in Tucson. because what book was it? It might have been Dark Side of the Moon. And there's a fighter jet sequence fairly early on in the novel, and I'd never flown a fighter jet. Go figure, right,
Yeah.
Roger? And I needed to know what it felt like, and I had a contact who I met through my brother, actually, and he took me into this facility where they had simulators where he
Ah,
taught pilots and Air Force aspiring pilots how to fly fighter jets. And I was like, and his name, was Moon. That was
ah,
his real name. And so Moon took me in, and I said, "Hey Moon, when we're in there, can you get some pictures of me in the simulator?" And he goes, "Oh man, no, I'm sorry, we're going into a skiff." And I looked at him and he goes, "Oh, it's a secure facility. Your phones, everything electronic, you're gonna have to put in this uh, cabinet, these lockers, and it's locked away before we even walk into the building." And so, yeah, couldn't get any pictures there, but I that was when I learned. I probably knew about it before, but that was my first time in a skiff, and man, did I feel naked without my phone and electronics and
it's amazing. Those of us who are of a certain age came to age without having our computers available in our hands all the dang time, connecting with everything. You have
yeah,
to, anytime you have a question, you immediately can get an answer there. So, yeah,
yeah.
it's sorry. If I leave it in the other room, I'll get up and go get it because even though I can hear it from where I am, it's not in my reach. So, there
Yeah,
you go.
exactly. So your question, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no, that was great. I love this. Again, it's a word side attraction every time I talk to you. Um, there was another thing that was intriguing, and it was a subtlety. And again, it's Rusakov who says you can think of us as private contractors. I don't have any arrest powers. I don't know if that puts your minds at ease, but it's the truth. And the next sentence is those were truthful statements. She did not say they were private contractors. It was a subtle difference, though omitting information using clever phrasing did leave room for moral debate as to what constitutes lying. And I think I mentioned to you in one of our previous interviews that one of my favorite authors, Spider Robinson, says that the cleverest way to lie is to tell part of the truth.
Yes, that's
And
absolutely true. The best lies are, and honestly, the best fiction has its roots in truth. Uh, your fiction, and I think I might even say that at the beginning of Die Trying, for a reason we can get into in a minute, but
yeah,
um, you can root your fiction in a degree of believability by surrounding it with facts and truth. Because if you can have the reader relate to some of those facts, they instantly think, "Oh yeah, that's true. That's right. I've heard that. I've read that. I know that. That's true." And then when you introduce your fiction, something that's not true that you made up or, you know, exaggerating, um, they automatically go along with it because their mind has already now decided this is true or this
yeah.
is real and believable. Therefore, everything that comes after that is believable as well. And I remember as a teenager dealing with the media in New York City. And when I say dealing with, watching the news, reading the news, I was always very plugged into uh, current events and politics and all that stuff. And some of that is where I grew up and some of the things that I experienced and watching how the media covered certain topics and so on and so forth. And I learned early on that omission is lying, just like a straight out statement of uh, of untruth. So I could say to you, the car was blue when it was brown. That's a lie. Or I could say, I didn't, I could just start talking about the car and I know that it was blue, but I'm purposely not telling you,
Yeah.
or brown, whatever the example was, but
Yeah.
I'm purposely not telling you that because that influences some other point that I or the journalist wants to make. So that point of omission, the journalist knows it was brown. He's not saying it was brown because that could undermine his argument. That's a lie. That is a form of lying. Omission is a form of lying, and I see that happening all the time in the media these days. And that goes to polarization of our
Mhm.
country. And I'm sure it's not just in our country, but
Yeah.
then you get into social media, which is even worse, where
Yeah.
a lot of our influencers, they're telling you their opinion and they're not giving you a balance. It's not Walter Cronkite, right? The
No.
way, people are going, who's Walter Cronkite?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the David Brinkley, a little bit more recent, or Tom Brokaw, the journalists that we trusted when they reported something, there was theoretically no agenda.
Yeah.
I remember a guy in New York, Roger Grimsby, he would say, "This is Roger Grimsby. Here now the news." It was
Oh.
kind of awkward, stilted, but that's what he would say. And it was kind of like, yeah, here's the truth, kind of
Yeah.
like that. I'm not going to editorialize. I'm not going to leave stuff out.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to influence you in any way. Here's the news. Here now the
Yeah.
news. Anyway,
That's when Walter would say, and that's the way it is. And
right.
that's again, and it just occurred to me, that's why the oath is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So the legal system recognizes it. They don't always catch it, though.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
No, that's
I have to
true.
ask time-wise on this, and this is coming out very shortly, as I understand. Publication date, do you have that?
Yeah, June 17th. It was changed just last week. Yeah,
Okay.
to June.
We're recording this on April 26th, so you've got some time. Run out and pre-order your copies for all your friends. Um, but in the timing, you wrote it last year, I'm assuming, or even before that.
Yeah.
But they call what they call a roman a clef, a novel with a key, but it feels a bit like that in terms of the president that you have here, who has certain resemblances to certain current occupants of the office. And I'm assuming that's intentional.
Actually not.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
yeah. So, and I'll point you to the very, very beginning of the book. I think it's in the advanced reader copy. I hope so. I don't know. If you go to the beginning, it'll say it's an intro from me, basically saying that I came up with this idea 25 years ago,
Oh,
which is true. It is a follow-on to the story that um, Hard Target kind of started. Hard Target came out in 2012, I believe, 2013, somewhere in there. But I had started writing it or I finished the first draft in 2003.
oh wow.
And yeah, so it deals with an idea, a concept that my wife actually thought of
Wow.
and uh, told me as we had got into bed, and she said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, I had this idea for a book." And she tells me the idea, and we fall asleep. And a few hours later, in the middle of the night, I just woke up and I had the whole story in my head. She couldn't
Wow.
figure out. She said, "Here's, the jumping off point," but she couldn't figure out what the story would be. So I kept a pad by my night table.
Yeah.
I opened the drawer, pulled out the notebook, and I wrote 12 pages. I still have it in the dark, and that was the plot for Hard Target. And it included a jumping off point that she came up with, and then the whole story, which I don't remember it being a dream. I just woke up and I had this idea. And so relative to the president, which ironically, his first name is Vance. And again, this, if you go to Hard Target from, you know, 12, 13 years ago, that character is in there.
Yeah.
He becomes president in the course of that novel. So again, no relationship to the present day
Yeah.
administration. But uh, so that said, now we go to some of what I was talking about before, 10 minutes ago about um, the best fiction having elements of truth
Hmm.
that prop up your fiction. And that's what I always try to do, and that's what I did here. So if there's something that somebody can relate to, um, I'm going to utilize that and sprinkle it in so they relate to it and go, oh, okay, so this is true. I know that's true. I know that's what's going on. That's what I've seen. That's what I've heard in the news. So this other stuff, wow,
Yeah.
that's believable too. So that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's my secret sauce, but it's, one of the ingredients I use when cooking up my novels. And I used it in Die Trying. So,
Yeah.
Die Trying has that element of, man, ripped from the headlines, because that's a lot of reviewers have said that
Yeah.
since my early novels. Oh, this reads like it's been ripped from the headlines. And the thing is that I usually come up with the headlines before they're news headlines,
Yes.
and then they start to become true. And, my agent, um, calls me, I forget what he called, I wouldn't say a witch, but, something along those lines,
Yeah.
because there are things in my novels that come true either while I'm writing it, after it comes out, 2 years after it comes out,
Yeah.
um, because I do the research, and then once I understand the set of facts that we're dealing with, then it's like, well, what if? Which that every professional writer knows that's
Yeah.
the two most important words that we have.
Yeah.
What if? And when we say what if, well, we've got the set of facts, and what if this happens?
Yeah.
And that ability to think outside the box is something that I always seek out in my contacts. And sometimes, I can find somebody with that skill set, sometimes not, because in the fields that I work with a lot, that is not something that's valued. Um, Law enforcement, science, medicine,
You want the by
they
the book
want
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. It's this is how this disease should present. These are the research findings. These are the medications that have been shown to be effective. They don't want somebody going, "Oh, what if we tried, something, vancomycin for this for dementia,
Yeah.
no, that's maybe a researcher might start looking into that, but that's not what a physician would do.
Yeah.
It's certainly not what law enforcement would do. So when I find somebody who's an outside the box thinker, or if I do, that's invaluable to me. And I remember back in, gosh, what year was it? It was shortly after Washington Field Office, the FBI's Washington Field Office opened, because it was a brand new building that they moved into. So I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s. Um, I should know this because I've been in that building like often. I think it was the early 2000s. And so I sat down with two FBI agents, and they were helping me, with research on Hard Target. And one of them was, by the book, no, that would not happen, no, 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 no. And the other one was like, well, wait a minute, it could happen if, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's what I need. Oh my God, that is a brilliant solution. And it saved my character and it saved my story, um, because he came up with something that would not normally happen
Ah.
at the Bureau unless
Yeah.
this other thing could happen. And that's where his creativity came in, and the outside the box thinking, and that idea that came up, that set me off on something that would become Uzi, the character of Uzi,
Hmm.
made him possible, and I should say believable.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, these experts will say things, and then the what if scenario is usually from me, but sometimes from one of my research experts will come up with that, and that is how I ended up with this character of President Nunn. Uh,
That's
who
Nunn, by the way, not
Yeah,
None, just to make sure that
that's that's a good point. Yeah, Vance Nunn, Nunn. Um, yeah, and he was sketched out from the beginning, and the whole concept of what's going on came from Hard Target, which, like I said, was from the
yeah,
very, very early 2000s.
yeah. And everybody is going to look at that and say, "Oh, this is obvious," but it's nice to know that you're at it again. So I want you to write about this interviewer of authors who wins the lottery, gets elected president. No, whatever. Since you're predictive. All right. Um, is there anything we've not touched on? Or we should mention all of the stuff that you do too. In addition, you've got your blog, you've got your website, etc. We should let the audience know about all of those.
So yeah, I try to put a lot of interesting things up on my website. Uh, there are also readers group guides, reading group guides for each one of my novels to stimulate discussion, questions, maybe some controversial questions for people to discuss in their reading groups, book groups. Um, what else do we, what are there interviews up there? And also, some things about getting published for aspiring writers.
Yeah.
There's some information and tips and background.
I just
Um,
looked at it this morning and it said there was a really all the steps. How do you find an agent? One of the toughest things for a brand new author. You've laid out some very concrete steps. And so you're paying it forward, which people appreciate.
yes, I do try to do that, and I try not to discourage people from going into this business.
Yeah.
What I try to do is open their eyes and say, here are the challenges, here's what the industry's like. You make up your own mind, but you should at least know what you're getting yourself into, know what it's like, know what the writer's life is like, and then you can make proper decisions, because I think it's really important to be able to make decisions from an informed perspective instead of, damn, I wish had I known that I would have done X.
Yeah.
And so, I don't discourage people. It's a very, very, very tough business. It just keeps getting tougher, even when you think it can't get any harder.
Yeah.
It does. And yeah, so I do try to pay it forward, but at the same time, I try to make sure that people have the proper resources to make up their own minds. And I always say, don't look at this as, your sole career. Have another job. Do
Something
this
to
on the
fall
side.
back on. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. If and when it becomes, it grows outsized and can sustain you, great,
Yeah.
go with it. But until then, don't plan on it.
Yeah. I should find out and probe a little as we're supposed to do about what's coming next. I'm assuming at some point that another Keller novel will be coming out.
Ah, that's a good assumption. I do have a novel outlined for Mickey Keller, and I no, it's what's coming next is a Karen Vail novel.
Okay.
Um, which would be the ninth Karen Vail novel. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. There's some things that people have been waiting for that will finally happen. It'll be classic Karen Vail, but with some twists that, are new. And yeah, I'm really excited I've already started outlining it, and I've done some research on it, and we'll be diving into that a little bit uh, in more detail. Yeah,
And
but
you
I've
can
got so
see,
many projects that I
yeah,
want to do. It's really a matter of having the time. 12:01 a.m. A Karen Vail short story, which came out in an anthology a few years ago, is finally going to be published through my publisher as a standalone short story.
Oh,
That's a
nice.
fun Karen Vail story that if you didn't buy the anthology, you wouldn't have been able to. That one was called Nothing Good Happens After Midnight. And it's a
I
fun
have that
anthology.
anthology, and I
Yeah,
loved that story. It was
yeah.
wonderful. It was a clever
So
way of the setup is really clever for the whole thing. So yeah, thank you.
it was. Yeah, and Jeffrey Deaver was the editor of that. And
Yeah.
so 1201 will I don't have a release date. We just signed a contract on that, but that'll be coming out soon. Um,
It's great because I got to interview Mr. Deaver. In fact, the two of you are very alike, I think, in terms of your attitude and your talent and your great interviews, both of you. So I want to appreciate that.
yeah, he's a special guy, special writer, and yes, very, very research oriented.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
told him one time, I said, I'm never going to get on an escalator again without thinking about what happened in one of your books. So, um, anyway, you have been so generous with your time today. Any closing thoughts you'd like before we let you go on and write some more for us?
Um, no, I try to post on Instagram and Threads now. Um, I one thing that I said at the beginning in this author's note of Die Trying is uh, I didn't want people to get the wrong impression because of similarities to the current administration.
Yeah.
Uh, because there's some politics involved. It's not a political thriller, but because it involves the president on some level, he's doing certain things, and again, this follows from uh, events that occurred in Hard Target, which you don't have to read to appreciate Die Trying, but it gives you certainly a fuller
Mhm.
appreciation for people who may think, oh, he just thought this up. No, it goes back far. Um, but I don't want people to think that I was looking, politically one way or the other, because have you could say, oh, he's against Democrats or he's against Republicans. It's like you won't be able to fit me into a category. I am an independent thinker. Things have to make sense to me. And I think if you follow my Threads page or posts, you'll see um, if something is just nonsensical, I will call it out and say, hey, this doesn't make sense, or this is not what America's supposed to be, and
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And people try to fit me into categories. Oh, you're no. It's just, I'm me, and I'm an American, and I'm an American. I try not to think, oh, he's a Democrat, he's a Republican. I'm Alan Jacobson. I'm an American, and things, no matter what, politics or anything, things always have to make sense to me, and I always want to understand the why and how things got there, so that I can understand how we can fix it or what are solutions. And that's kind of how I approach my novels. My character is in this predicament. How do we get her out of that
Yeah.
predicament? And anyway.
You can borrow my phrase. I call myself a militant moderate. So,
Oh, that's an interesting phrase.
well, it's that my thought is that people say this side of the road, that side of the road. No, the middle is the only usable part. The other sides are the ditches. So, or
Yeah.
the gutters, if you want
I
to think of it that way. Yeah. So,
I uh I do think of myself as a moderate.
yeah.
And I think either extreme is bad. And I think from what I am told, a very, very large portion of the country thinks that way.
We're just being led by loud mouths elsewhere.
Yeah,
That's my comment. You don't have to agree with that, but that's mine. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. You have been such a good person to talk to again. I really appreciate this opportunity. Our guest today has been the incredible and delightful Ellen Jacobson, The book is called Die Trying. Go out and buy multiple copies. This is what we call the good stuff with capital G and capital S. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Roger. Always a pleasure.